Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second of our 3 Model UN training videos. Today, we're going to be talking about writing your resolution. So taking all that research that we worked on last time and turning it into a written resolution that you'll have to turn in before the conference's final deadline. My name is Tyler Dorr. I'm a program director for the Center for Civic Engagement, and I am joined by 2 Model UN officers. Guys, take it away.
Hi, my name is Greta. I go to USN, and I will be the Secretary General of MUN Conference A in 2021.
Hi, my name is Apeksha Sawarkar, and I'm a senior at Hume Fogg, and I'm going to be one of your vice presidents at the MUN Conference A this year.
So a resolution is a written proposal that your country is bringing before the UN, and you're asking for the UN to support it, essentially. So it's an idea for improving international relations and aiding other countries in order to solve problems that are plaguing the world. So a resolution is a suggestion, a request, or a statement of world opinion. And although your resolution can suggest international punishments like sanctions, it can't actually force a country to do something. Every country team at Model UN must submit one resolution before the final deadline. So make sure to mark that in your calendars and make sure to meet with your team and write it before the deadline. So the scope of a resolution is that your resolution should not only deal with problems in your own country, because that problem can be solved by your own country's government. So it's not typically a good UN resolution to say Hungary should build a bridge over a river in Hungary, or we should build only specifically water plants in like your own country, because your own government can't do that. So the resolution should involve the UN or be international in its scope. So for example, Jamaica asked the UN to send humanitarian workers to help with earthquake cleanup, or creating a task force that's aimed at providing food and shelter for hurricane victims across the world. So one thing you might want to consider are the bodies and agencies of the UN. You need to think about which parts of the UN your resolution require, let's say how your resolution would be enforced, who would be enforcing it, who would be handling the money. So your resolution could set up a new body or agency, but dozens of those agencies already exist. So look around if you feel the need to create a new one, or if your resolution can be handled by one that already exists. So for example, the WHO, World Health Organization, that also helps with like diseases. So you could consider looking into their fund if you want to fund something that deals with health in the world. The IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, or the UN peacekeepers, which often station forces around the world for peacekeeping. So a resolution should be compatible with the perspective of your country, which means that you will have to do research and look into what your country has done in the past.
So in my opinion, I think that to make your resolution compatible, it should agree with how your country has functioned in the past. So you wouldn't want to do anything that would seem out of the ordinary of your country's government to want to do. So you would want to look at past resolutions or things that your country has done, so that you can write your resolution in accordance to agree with that, so it's not very different to how your government usually functions.
And whenever I've researched, I usually look up the history of a country, like what conflicts has your country been involved in? What is the current political system in your country, and what is your country's economy reliant on? Like, let's say your country is heavily reliant on, let's say, oil production, then they might not lean too far into sustainability without some reservation.
Yeah, something I'd add to that too is your country is in real life a member of the UN. So a lot of times you can look up the website of your country's ambassador or team that works at the UN and check what their stance has been on issues. And that's often a great guide for figuring out, just at first glance, how your country feels about a lot of issues that come before the UN. Another thing to consider is the financial situation of your country. So you can look at the history of whether your country has been a big contributor to the UN, or if there's someone who on net gets funded by a lot of UN initiatives. So knowing the financial status of your country before you draft your resolution is often a really good way to set yourself up for success.
So, and resolutions can do 4 things. So 1, suggest that a nation alter its behavior to be in line with UN principles or guidelines. So for example, there are human rights violations occurring. A resolution can suggest punishments for nations that violate international law. So you can agree to stop trading or impose sanctions on a country that is not in compliance with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. 2, you can request that all countries agree to a new position or viewpoint on an international issue. So an example would be a new agreement for cooperation on climate change. And 3, your resolution can also gain approval for a specific program or action using UN funds or resources. So an example would be sending humanitarian aid into a disaster zone, deploying peacekeepers to a conflict. And 4, another thing you should consider is, another thing your resolution can do is change the way that the UN operates. So for example, expanding the number of permanent Security Council members from 5 to 6.
So for me, I see that like a fun resolution is something that has like new ideas that are creative and engaging, and it often leads to the rest of your committee being more engaged in debate as well. Sometimes it can get repetitive with the questions that are being asked, and it's often a lot better when people are asking different questions that are specific to a resolution rather than just like, what's your budget, which can get very repetitive very quickly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I would consider resolutions that are international in scale, like we've mentioned previously, but also with a clear point of contention or some clear line of reasoning for what you specifically want to do. So not something controversial as in like provoking others purposely, but as in exploring nuance in international conflicts and sort of understanding that there are sometimes no clear sides or solutions. So for example, like building a water treatment facility in your country is relatively straightforward. But you might want to consider like addressing water disputes between countries. And basically, since the pro-con debates are sort of the meat of what you'll be doing, it's very fun to have a resolution where both pro and con have like equal sides, and it's very enjoyable to do.
Along with that point, I would say that the more detailed your resolution can be about what your country is proposing the UN do, the easier it is for people to latch on and discuss different things during debate. So the more of those details you can throw in your proposal, I would say the better debate you're setting yourself up to have.
Let's talk about joke resolution policy and the Tomfoolery Committee. So joke resolutions are not allowed at the Center for Civic Engagement conferences. So resolutions presented in General Assembly must be serious in nature and uphold the Y core values of honesty, caring, respect, and responsibility. But if you have a good idea for a joke resolution, like let's say banning dihydrogen monoxide, submit it to the Tomfoolery Committee during the conference.
In the past, we've had some really fun resolutions, like one to put a cork in every active volcano to stop them from exploding. So it's often a really fun way to flex your debate muscles on a less serious topic, while still making sure that the topic that you submit for your resolution in General Assembly is serious and upholds the Y core values.
So I like to find ideas by looking at past resolutions that have been done successfully by the country that I'm representing. So that way I can determine like what issues are most important.
Personally, I like to think about issues that you care about on a local level and then look at it on a global scale. I also think it's a great idea to look at the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are listed out for until I think 2030. And I also like to look at articles tagged with my country on the UN news.
I think both of those are great starting points. I just want to jump along on the reading up on current events and news from your country. That can often be a great source of inspiration for resolutions, specifically if you see certain issues that keep coming up. An underrated method for finding your resolution too, I think, is looking at what the UN is currently doing in your country. Odds are, if your country struggles with something specific, the UN already has an agency or a task force that's doing work in your country around that issue. So reviewing those things that are happening and seeing if there's any way you can improve the process or improve the targeting or export the lessons that you've learned in your country to other work that the UN is doing around the world, I think is always a great way for your country to have an impact in the General Assembly.
We'll move on to pieces of a resolution. So your resolution needs to present context for the issue that you're trying to solve and then detail your proposed solution. So we suggest that you use the following format. So first you would state your title and then start with a resolution to and then whatever you are trying to get done. So your topic should be specific and straightforward, and you cannot amend the title of your resolution at the conference. So then you'll start doing your preambulatory clauses, which introduce the problem to the UN. So you need to start with there's a list of good starting words in the MUN manual that are really helpful to make sure that your resolution's engaging and also uses words that tie directly to what you're trying to solve. So the purpose of these clauses is to provide necessary background information. So you want to make sure that everyone listening knows exactly what you're talking about, and there's no confusion as to like what definitions they're supposed to be or what certain acronyms stand for. So you want to explain the problem, the source of the problem, and why the United Nations should care in the first place. So your format can be as long or as short as you like. So there's 5 types of preambulatory clauses. The first one is general statements, which are just background information on why your topic is important and its impact. Then you'll move on to citations or mentions of past UN resolutions, treaties, or conventions related to your topic. This is where you can allude to different things that have been done in the past to provide more context to what your resolution is trying to say now. Your third type would be references to sections in the UN Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights, or other international laws related to your topic. So kind of like what Greta was saying, the UN sustainable goals would be something that you would want to reference if you're doing something regarding like climate change. And then your fourth type would be recognition of the efforts of nations and or regional non-governmental aid organizations in addressing your topic. So you can kind of talk about other countries that have tried something similar or are like in the process of creating this similar type of thing that your resolution is trying to solve. And then your fifth and final type would be quotes and statements made by the UN Secretary General or a UN body / agency relevant to your topic.
And I'll add that every resolution need not contain all 5 of these kinds of preambulatory clauses, but these are the 5 different kinds, and you can sort of mix and match according to your own specific resolution. Ideally, what the preambulatory clauses do is set everyone up for debate on the topic, even if they're not super familiar with the exact issue that you're presenting to the UN. Your goal with these clauses should be to give people a very quick background on what you're going to be talking about before your resolution begins talking about how you're going to solve the problem.
I would say like be thorough in your background information. You want to establish that the problem exists and it's continuing to exist without any intervention, and the problem has significant impacts or harms on people. In general, I would say maybe around half a page.
So I think that preambulatory clauses can have a big impact on what you're being asked during debate. So if you don't specify or define like an acronym, then you're definitely going to be asked like, hey, what does like this stand for? And so if you do a good job of defining all the terms that might be relevant in your resolution, then you won't be asked as many technical questions about terms that don't really have a relevancy to the main idea of your resolution. So you'll be able to focus on more important things that you want to debate rather than wasting time on like just defining terms. As for how long it should be, there's nothing wrong with having like a super short resolution. So I think as long as you have everything fully laid out, then there should be no like, there's not like a set like word count or anything. I think just like as long as everything's fully defined, then I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think those are both great answers. The length obviously is going to be very dependent on how detailed your resolution is. But I would suggest thinking about your resolution as if the operative clauses are the most important part, because after all, that's how you're going to be trying to solve the problem that your resolution presents. The preambulatory clauses are just a tool that can help show how great your solution is. So sometimes you need a lot of background in order to be able to explain why your solution is a good one. Sometimes you don't need much at all.
So after you do your preambulatory clauses, you would want to state the General Assembly does hereby, and then you'll begin your operative clauses, which are basically your solution or what your solution or your resolution is aiming to do. So you want to start off with an action verb such as proclaims, approves, further invites, recommends, encourages, or requests, and the rest of it should answer one of these 3 questions. How are you asking the UN to fix the problem? What agencies will you need to use, and how much will this cost? So for the format, operative clauses are numbered, and each clause ends in a semicolon except for the last one, which ends in a period. So make sure your solution stays in the character of your country and you're doing something that makes sense for you, where your country has done in the past. It doesn't infringe on any nation's sovereignty, so you're not stepping on anybody's toes by doing this. And you're staying within the power of the UN, so you're not doing something outrageous that just cannot be done by the UN itself.
For tricks, I would say keep all your research for a resolution in a document, because it's also helpful to reference later on in debate. So it's also helpful to tackle it in sections with your group, but make sure that you're meeting with your group to make sure you're meeting with your group so that your resolution is consistent across all the sections. And I would say you could write it in any order that you want.
So for kind of tips and tricks, I would say split up the workload among your group to make sure everybody contributes an equal amount. So you don't want one person doing all the work. And you also want to set concrete deadlines to have things done by, because before you know it, like the time will come to submit your resolution and you won't have proofread anything, and then that can get kind of stressful. So kind of like a week or 2 weeks before the deadline, just like get everything together and make sure you're in a good spot. And then check your formatting and make sure you're using the correct vocabulary, like kind of in the operative clauses, like make sure you're using action verbs and everything is formatted right. And then get your resolution peer read by someone from your school. So you can get an outside perspective, because it's very easy to miss something when you're reading it yourself. So just getting someone else to read it for you can definitely point out flaws you might have missed, like reading it yourself. And then for order, I don't do it in any specific order, but once I have my resolution idea, I'd like to start with like the operative clauses, because it kind of details everything that you need to know about the resolution. And then preambulatory, I'll go in and define anything or give any context like second.
I definitely recommend taking some time to edit your resolution after it's completely finished. If there's anything that is, extraneous to your argument or the narrative that you're trying to create with the problem in the preambulatory clauses and the solution in the operative clauses, you can go ahead and cut that out or just leave it as a fact that you can fill in your introduction, summation, or sometime during debate. The only things that need written down in your resolution are the specific instructions that you're giving to the UN if the resolution passes.
Yeah, so I look for resolutions that have very clear wording, and also they get to the point, but also without lacking any details. So also being able to show an awareness for the nuance in these issues and not being completely one-sided or biased in a way.
So I think a good resolution is one that knows its issue like completely, like it has everything that you need to know written in the resolution. And those kinds of resolutions make me like very interested, because I know that team has all their work done, and like their debate will be very interesting and engaging. So I look for those types, but I think a good resolution looks different, like depending on, it can be as short as like 1.5 a page, or it can be as long as like 4 pages. Like it does not matter. Like those kinds of things should not have an impact on whether it's a good or bad resolution. But I just think a lot, specifically for me, resolutions that impact like my country that I'm representing will definitely pique my interest. And resolutions that impact like a whole majority of countries, or ones that are pulling in other countries to help do something or achieve a common goal, those are also very interesting to me.
I think one of the things that I look for, both when I'm debating resolutions and then also kind of from a staff perspective, what the awards committee looks for in resolutions is very specific operative clauses. It is very easy in a resolution to say, we want to improve education in, whatever country you're representing. But I think a more interesting resolution talks about how you're going to improve education. Are you going to build new buildings? Where's the funding going to come from? Who's going to work on the construction of the buildings? Who's going to work in the school buildings? Is your program providing incentives for teachers? There's a lot of different details that go into any operation that the UN does. So the more that your resolution can kind of touch on those details, even if everything is not perfectly worked out, I think it's more interesting to grab onto during debate, And it's definitely something that we look for when we're choosing outstanding resolutions. And so right here, we're looking at an example resolution from a couple of years ago. This is sponsored by Monaco. They put it in the Special Political and Decolonization Committee. And the title of the resolution is Marine Protected Areas in the Mediterranean. Now, you can see just kind of looking at this resolution that about half of the resolution is the preambulatory clauses. You'll notice that those all start with kind of the key words that are outlined in the Model UN manual and give the background to what this resolution is going to do. Then kind of at the midway point of the resolution, we have the delegation of Monaco does hereby. This indicates that we're moving into the operative clauses or the things that Monaco is specifically requesting that the UN do. And then the rest of the resolution is made up of those operative clauses. So there's 5 different things that this resolution is asking the UN to do. Those are the 5 operative clauses. So I'll just kind of open it up to the group. What do we like about this resolution? What do we think it does well?
I can go first. So what I liked is that it's finding existing agency. It hits the main points for the preambulatory clauses. It establishes there's a problem and there's a need for action.
Kind of to like jump onto what Greta said, I liked how they talked about pulling in all the members of the United Nations. So it's like affecting essentially everybody who would be reading it. So that can spark a lot of like questions for debate, because everybody should have some sort of question about how their country will be involved in this.
Yeah, I also think one thing this resolution does very well is it captures the perspective of what it would actually be like to be representing Monaco in the UN. So one of the things that's noted in the preambulatory clauses is that Monaco's already taken a number of conservation actions within its own national government. And this seems like a logical next step for Monaco to try and use its position in the UN to get other regional states kind of bought in on the same method for protecting the Mediterranean Sea. It seems like a very logical thing for Monaco to do. And that's one of my favorite parts of the resolution is I think it is a very accurate representation of the kind of things that Monaco is working on in the UN right now. What are some things that we think could be improved here?
Yeah, so first thing, just reading through what I think is really what I would want more detail on is on the specific obstacles that it mentions on the last preambulatory clause. I would have liked to know specifically why other countries haven't been joining. Is there funding, any main specific funding issues or lack of communication, those sort of details.
And also I would have liked to see more specifics on like a budget or what kind of like UN funds need to be allocated, so that we can assess like the impact and like be able to understand which places aside from Monaco will be impacted by this resolution.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, kind of narrowing in on the operative clauses here. It's totally okay for, funding to be not completely worked out or based on estimates, because none of us have a perfect idea of what these kind of operations will cost in the real world. But having some kind of estimate or a window into how the proposal author is thinking about what the budget of this resolution is going to look like would be super helpful. Another thing I'd suggest to these resolution authors is you can elevate this proposal a lot by kind of increasing the specificity of your different operative clauses. I'll kind of narrow in on the second operative clause as something emblematic of what I'm talking about. Congratulates the current partners and promotes other nations to become partners of this network or other similar networks. So at its heart, what this operative clause is doing is a really good idea. Like, it is suggesting that there be a campaign to pull other countries in the region into this project, which is at the heart of success for this resolution. However, this operative clause is just not very specific on how that's going to get done. Whether that is going to be like setting up committees in order to discuss what different countries would need to agree to the project, or convening some kind of convention in order for different countries to come and like sign on to like a common agreement, or even just like setting up the different terms, both incentives and costs that other countries would face when they're trying to decide whether or not to be a part of this. So that some of this gets addressed later in the operative clauses, but I think the more specific you can be about each part of your resolution's plan, the better off you're going to be. There's also some allusion to funding in the fourth operative clause here, recommends that the UN appropriate funds, but it doesn't really give an estimate or a window into how much those will be. And I think at least having an estimate out there or a range could do a lot to improve how different countries are able to evaluate this resolution.